he said, we want to ask you a few more questions. And I said, no, I'm done with answering any more questions. I'm finished with you people. I've had enough. And I then launched into a series of insults and curses and swearing. And then I rounded it off with something that I've never done in my life before, I've never done since, and you would get sent off a football pitch for doing it. I spat at them. And then I went into my cell and I started shaking. And a couple of the Christian girls said, did you just do what we thought you did? And I said, yes, I've gone beyond the line. I've gone beyond the wire. I've pushed it, and I'm in serious trouble now. I can sense it. And just then one of the female prison officers came in, and which was translated for me later, and she said, tell the English woman she is going to be flogged because she cannot do this to high-ranking people. So I'm standing there rigid with fear, cursing me and my big mouth, and wondering, is there going to be a public flogging? Will Al Jazeera be there to record it? You know, what is going to happen? And I'm standing there rigid with fear, and about 10, 15 minutes later, we heard the gates open in the courtyard, and Heather, one of the American girls, came running in, and she said, they've returned. Yvonne is going to be flogged. And just then, 3 of the Christians threw themselves down at me and grabbed onto my clothes and started saying, Lord Jesus, don't let Yvonne feel any pain. And I'm standing there looking at them thinking, you know, you're making it worse. And just then the smiling assassin walked in, and he had in his hand the one thing that I wanted, the very thing I had gone on hunger strike for 9 days earlier. He had in his hand a satellite phone, and he strutted around the cell and showed off this satellite phone. And he said, all of you can ring home. You can all ring your families today. Apart from her, the English woman, she's horrible and she spat at us and she has to be punished. So it's interesting, this is how the most evil, brutal regime in the world decided to punish me. They allowed my cellmates to ring home, which was fantastic for the Germans. They hadn't, and all of them, they hadn't spoken to their family for 2 months. It was an opportunity to ring home and say, look, we're okay, we're holding out. And then one of the German girls went to the smiling assassin and made a special plea and said, look, Yvonne needs to talk to her daughter. Please let her call home. And he said, no, she's a horrible woman. She has to be punished. And as I say, that was my punishment, which I, looking back, think, shows a degree of wisdom and insight on their part, which is more than can be said for my behavior. And my only mitigation is, look, I hadn't eaten for 9 days and I was starting to get fractures. That afternoon, the senior officers returned and they removed me without warning, got my things together and said, you're going. And then they took me out of the prison and upstairs into the Taliban sleeping quarters. And one of the senior officers had vacated his room and said, you complained about the prison downstairs, is this good enough for you? And it was a very nice room by Afghan standards. And he said, tomorrow you will go home, inshallah. And I said, what is this inshallah you keep using at the end of every sentence and it never ever happens? Of course, I now know inshallah means God willing. And they put me in this room, they gave me the key, I locked myself in, I had a fantastic view over the city of Kabul, looking right up to Kabul Hill where all the anti-aircraft units were. And I sat on the bed contemplating my future, wondering if and when I'd ever get out. They kept saying, tomorrow you will go home, inshallah, but inshallah it never happened. And so I was wondering how genuine they actually were. Why had they removed me from the Christians? Was this my last night on earth? Would they execute me tomorrow? I really didn't know. All of this was going through my mind, and then suddenly there was a huge rip, as though somebody had just torn the sky open, and there was a great big light, and it was the start of the war. That night, America and Britain dropped 50 cruise missiles on Kabul. You can hear a cruise missile from 20 miles away. These were coming within a quarter of a mile of the prison. I had covered wars before, and I don't know why it had not occurred to me then, but it certainly occurred to me that night. These bombs don't discriminate. There's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide. Civilian, military, man, woman, child, these bombs cannot tell the difference. I'm going to be blown apart by a British bomb. I've got no doubt Tony Blair will blame the Taliban, and that will be the end of that. And it was truly terrifying. And I also thought, there is no way the Taliban will let me go now. Absolutely no way at all. And the next morning, there was a knock on my door, and I was told, please, there is a vehicle outside. We are going to release you. I couldn't believe it. But sure enough, there was a vehicle. They put me in it. We drove down from Kabul, through Jalalabad, down to Torkham, and eventually, after some shenanigans, I was handed over to the Pakistan authorities. And as I walked back across no man's land, the camera lights went up, and the journalists started shouting, how did the Taliban treat you? And in truth, up until the point that I was released, I still didn't trust them 1 inch, and I thought everything that they were trying to do had a hidden motive. It was only at the point that they released me that I thought, you know what, they were quite an honourable bunch of guys. So when this journalist shouted at me, how did the Taliban treat you? I thought for a while, and then I said, with respect and courtesy. This is not what the Western media wanted. The Western media wanted Abu Ghraib tales. They wanted abuse, rape, torture. They wanted to see scars. They wanted to see tears. There was nothing I could give them other than the truth. And sadly, for some people, the truth is never enough. When I got back to London, about 2 weeks later, one of my guides on the Pakistan side called me, and he said, Madam, the village that you visited has been bombed by the Americans. That was the village Karma, which is smaller than this hall we're in now. And I said, look, Pasha, I know these terrible things happen in the fog of war. And it's awful, but these accidents do happen. And he said, but madam, how can you accidentally bomb a village the size of Karma 3 days running? Now then, the Americans were telling us all about their strategic strikes, their surgical strikes, their B-52 bombers coming at 30,000 feet. Karma wouldn't have even looked like a dot from 30,000 feet. It was quite clear to me that this was indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas. And in many ways, the Taliban were to blame because they kicked out all of the Western journalists. Whatever you think about journalists, we do have our functions and our role. We are the eyes, the ears, the witnesses. And by kicking out all of the Western journalists, they ensured that Britain and America could and would bomb indiscriminately across the country, slaughtering innocent civilians, which they did. That propelled me into the anti-war movement and made me become very, very active as an anti-war campaigner. At that same time, I remembered the promise that I had given to the religious cleric. And I thought, well, against all the odds, they kept their word. While they hung on to the Christians, they let me go. And really, I should keep my promise now. And I started to read the Quran. Very soon, groups of Muslims found out, and somebody gave me a wonderful English translation by A. Yusuf Ali with an index in the back. So I thought, great, I'll get this over and done with very quickly. I'm going to cherry pick and I'm going to read all about the subjugation and oppression of women and what promotes people to slam planes into towers. So I started cherry picking and going through all the women's issues. And then I had other Islamic literature to support my reading of the Quran. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The Quran makes it perfectly clear, crystal clear, no two ways about it. Women are equal in spirituality, worth, and education. Furthermore, the first convert to Islam was a woman. The first martyr to Islam was a woman. Women played major roles right from day one in Islam. They fought alongside the men. The Prophet, peace be upon him, picked out one particular woman and singled her out for praise during a battle, the Battle of Uhud. And he said, everywhere I looked, this woman was there, protecting me, fighting with me, fighting alongside me. I thought, where have we got this idea that women are oppressed and subjugated? Where do we get it from? Who put the poison in our minds? I then looked at property rights, inheritance rights, divorce rights. What's yours is yours, what's his is half of yours. Yeah, brilliant. Much of it could have been written by a Californian lawyer. In fact, this is from where they probably get their inspiration. All these tales in the tabloids about the superstars having prenuptial contracts and teams of lawyers drawing up and thrashing out these prenuptial contracts, they were available to Muslim women from day one. And so I began to see Islam in a totally different light. And I thought, yes, okay, this is great, but what are the people like? And so I went out into the Muslim communities, specifically to meet the sisters. And it didn't matter where I went in the world, whether it was Pakistan, or whether it was Saudi, or Canada, or America, or Australia, and now New Zealand. The Muslim women I have met, whether they have been formally educated or not, are resilient, strong, politicized, internationally aware, multi-skilled, multi-talented. A few years ago, I would have looked in this room and picked out everyone wearing a hijab, and I would have thought, oh, look at those poor, oppressed women. How did they manage to sneak out of the home to come here? Now I'm looking and I'm trying to work out who is the engineer, who is the doctor, who is the lawyer, who is the teacher, who is doing the PhD, who's doing the MA, who's raising kids at the same time, supporting their man, running a business, a charity, who is the backbone of the community. I see incredibly diverse women. And I remember a sister in Canada who said to me, Yvonne, my head might be covered, but my mind is not. And the most valuable lesson that I learned from the sisters that I met is never ever again will I judge a person's freedoms and liberties by the length of their skirt. So this was wonderful. The other thing that I learned about the Muslim community is it has an incredibly gossipy network. And I could visit somebody in Glasgow one day, and by the next morning I'd get a phone call from somebody in Karachi saying, I hear you were in Scotland. How did it go? The communication is amazing, but sometimes there were Chinese whispers and people had false information that I had taken my shahada, the oath to become a Muslim. And I remember one day, I'm sure many of you in this hall will have at least heard the name. One day I got a phone call from Sheikh Abu Hamza al-Masri, the fire and brimstone cleric from Finsbury Park Mosque, who is currently detained at Her Majesty's pleasure in Belmarsh. And he rang me up and he said, Sister Yvonne, welcome to Islam. And I said, well, thank you very much. However, I hate to disappoint you, but you're a wee bit premature. I haven't taken my shahada yet, but, you know, I will get there, inshallah. And he said, well, take your time. This is going to be the most important decision you ever make in your life. Don't be rushed into it. Don't be pressurized into it. Make sure that you read as much as you can. Be convinced before you take your shahada. We are all making dua, prayer for you. And I thought, I can't believe that this is the fire and brimstone cleric from Finsbury Park Mosque. The tabloids love to hate him because of his hooks and his eye patch, and they really have demonized him. And I said, well, thank you very much for your understanding. I will keep you informed with my progress. And I was just about to close the line when he said, well, there's just one thing I want you to know. And I said, well, what's that? He said, well, if you go out tomorrow and you're hit by a bus, you will go straight to hellfire. I said, thank you, and closed the line. And that made me nervous. It made me very nervous. So I took a copy of the Shahada and I carried it round with me. And I would address meetings like this and I would say, look, if you come across an accident and you hear someone shouting for 2 Muslim witnesses, please come running fast because it's me trying to get in before it's too late. Happily, there was no such accident. And on June the 30th in 2003, at 11:30 in the morning, I took my Shahada and declared my belief that there is only one God and that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his messenger. And I joined then what I consider to be the biggest and the best family in the world. And I know that wherever I go in the world, it doesn't matter how remote the place is, I will meet brothers and sisters who will give me their love and support and help if I need it. And that is very important to me. I was also lucky enough in January this year to go on Hajj, the annual pilgrimage which Muslims are required to do at least once in their life. As I say, the Saudi women don't think for 1 minute that they're oppressed or subjugated. They're like a tightly coiled spring, and they are really ready to launch into the political scene in Saudi Arabia. There were elections earlier this year. Women weren't allowed to vote. Let me tell you, I really feel that the next elections, not only will women be voting, they will be standing as well. These women are really, really remarkable, and as I say, they're in the wings and they're ready to launch. Unfortunately, because of Saudi's restrictive media rules, we hardly get to find out any real news that is happening there. But these sisters from Jeddah told me how distressed they were during the Second Intifada, the uprising in Palestine, how distressed they were, and they had been discussing this in the mosque after Friday prayers. And they wanted to show their solidarity with their Palestinian sisters. So they did something that is forbidden in Saudi. They had a spontaneous demonstration. And they shouted and demonstrated, and the police were called because of this public disorder. And the police moved in, and one of the main women stood in front of the police and she said, "Dare one of you touch us? We are Saudi women and you cannot touch us." And the police sprang back, and they were wondering, what on earth are we going to do with these women? We can't have them demonstrating. But they're right, we can't manhandle them and cart them off to jail either. And there was this standoff for about half an hour as the women continued with their protest. In the end, the police chief had a better idea, and they went and arrested all their husbands instead. They took them to the station, and they said the next time their wives did this, they would be charged. Which is a wonderful tale. So that was Hajj in January. Obviously, you're all aware of the London bombings. I live in central London. We were shocked by the ferocity of the atrocity, but not surprised. The anti-war movement and the political party I belong to, called Respect, which is led by George Galloway MP, had said long before the first bombs dropped on Baghdad, "We told Tony Blair, if you take us into a war with Iraq, our security will vanish. London will become a target." In his arrogance, he dismissed us. He dismissed the fears of 2 million people who marched in London. He would rather take his orders from Washington. Really, I salute New Zealand in its strength and determination to stand up to America over many different issues. That stand it should be me applauding you. That stand has made New Zealand one of the safest places on earth in terms of security, and certainly your anti-nuclear stance is admirable. Beware of siren calls from politicians like Winston Peters, who thrive only on hate. You have a very important election coming up soon. I can't tell you how to vote, but just be wary of those who would want to stand shoulder to shoulder with George Bush, because you will end up in serious trouble like we have in Britain. Thank you very much for listening to me. I am really looking forward to hearing your questions and observations. As I say to the non-Muslims here tonight, I am not Islam's answer to Billy Graham. I am not here to get you to convert. But if you are interested in learning a little bit more about Islam for your own benefit, not for any other reason, there's some books outside which you're welcome to take away. Thank you very much for being a terrific audience. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.